At 58, Maggie Hale thought losing her husband had already taught her how empty a farmhouse could feel until one cold autumn evening, her daughter Rachel pulled into the driveway with 9-year-old Ethan, 6-year-old Lucy, 2 overstuffed bags, and a promise that Maggie only needed to watch them for a few days. Rachel drove away before supper, and those few days became a week, then several weeks, while every call went unanswered. Maggie was already struggling to keep her small Iowa farm alive on one income. The tractor needed repairs, feed bills were climbing, and suddenly she was packing school lunches, washing children's clothes, tending livestock before sunrise, and trying to answer the same heartbreaking question every night. When is Mommy coming back? Her own relatives told her she was being foolish. Sell some land. Call the authorities. Stop sacrificing what remained of her life for a daughter who had already walked away from her responsibilities. But Maggie made a decision none of them understood. She would keep the farm, and she would raise those children herself, even if doing both cost her everything. Years passed. The little girl stopped leaving an empty chair for her mother at dinner, and the frightened boy waiting at the end of the driveway grew into a teenager who could repair machinery almost as well as his late grandfather had. Maggie began to believe that maybe all those frozen mornings, unpaid bills, broken fences, and sleepless nights had built something stronger than the family Rachel had shattered. Then, at 18, Ethan stood in the same driveway where he had once waited for his mother, and said something to Maggie that broke her heart. He left the farm, and for years he barely came back. Maggie grew older. Her hands developed arthritis. The machinery failed more often. Eventually, the farm she had sacrificed everything to preserve became more than she could manage alone. So she did the one thing she had resisted for nearly 2 decades. She called a realtor. A for sale sign went up beside the road, but before sunrise the following morning, Maggie woke to the sound of a pickup coming slowly up the driveway. She stepped onto the porch and watched a grown man climb out. 16 years earlier, he had arrived at this farm as an abandoned 9-year-old boy. Now Ethan had returned, carrying something from his grandfather in the truck, and what he was about to tell Maggie would finally reveal whether all those years she spent raising someone else's children had saved a family or simply delayed its ending. But before we find out why Ethan came back, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Are you starting your morning, taking a break in the afternoon, or listening late at night? Wherever you are, I hope you're having a peaceful and wonderful day. And if you enjoy emotional stories about grandparents, family, farm life, sacrifice, and the people who find their way home years later, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story. Now, let's go back to that cold autumn evening when Maggie Hale saw her daughter's car coming up the farm road and had no idea that 2 children in the back seat were about to change the rest of her life. The first frost had silvered the grass along the fence line when Maggie Hale saw Rachel's car coming up the farm road. Maggie was carrying a bucket toward the chicken shed and stopped when she recognized the dented blue sedan. Rachel had not called. These days, that usually meant trouble. The car pulled beside the farmhouse, and before Maggie reached the porch, the back doors opened. 9-year-old Ethan climbed out carrying a backpack and a stuffed duffel. His 6-year-old sister, Lucy, followed with a pink suitcase almost too large for her to pull. Maggie looked at the luggage, then at Rachel. "What's going on?" Rachel shut off the engine but left the keys in the ignition. "I need you to keep them for a few days." "A few days?" "I've got some money problems. I need to straighten things out." Maggie lowered her voice. "What kind of problems? Not in front of them." "Mom." Ethan stared toward the barn as though he had heard this conversation before. Lucy abandoned her suitcase and ran to Maggie. "Grandma!" Maggie hugged her automatically. Lucy's coat was too thin for the weather. Did Mommy tell you we're sleeping here? She just did. C smiled. Can we sleep in Mommy's old room? Maggie looked at Rachel. You packed a lot for a few days. Rachel's expression hardened. They need school clothes, Rachel. Please. I just need some time. Maggie wanted to demand answers, but Lucy was holding her hand, and Ethan had gone silent in the particular way children did when adults thought they were not listening. Fine, Maggie said. A few days. Rachel kissed Lucy quickly. When she approached Ethan, he stepped back. Ethan, when are you coming back? Soon. What day? Rachel hesitated. I'll call Grandma. Ethan's face changed almost imperceptibly. He did not argue. He simply picked up his duffel. Rachel handed Maggie a folded sheet of paper. You might need this for school. Why would I need? I have to go. Within minutes, her car was disappearing down the gravel road. Ethan watched until it passed the cornfield and vanished. Maggie touched his shoulder. Come inside. It's cold. She's not coming back in a few days, he said. Maggie looked at him. Your mother said she would. She says things. Then he carried his bag into the house. Maggie had not prepared dinner for 3. She stretched a pot of beef stew with potatoes, found clean sheets for Rachel's old bedroom, and discovered Samuel's former office still had a narrow pull-out bed Ethan could use. 3 years after her husband's death, Maggie had finally become accustomed to the farmhouse being too quiet. By 7 that evening, Lucy was singing in the bathtub. Ethan was searching for his toothbrush, and wet mittens hung beside the stove. The house felt crowded again. It also felt frighteningly alive. At supper, Lucy asked, Will Mommy be back before Saturday? Maggie glanced toward Ethan. I'm sure she'll call. That wasn't what she asked, Ethan said. Ethan. He lowered his eyes and ate. Maggie did not correct him again. Afterward, she checked the farm accounts at the kitchen table. Feed was due. The tractor had developed a hydraulic leak that morning. Property taxes were approaching. Maggie could manage a few extra grocery bills. Beyond that, she did not know. Lucy appeared in pajamas, dragging a blanket behind her. Grandma! What is it, sweetheart? What if Mommy forgets where we are? Maggie's chest tightened. She knows exactly where you are. Lucy climbed into her lap. Okay. Maggie held her until the child relaxed. Ethan stood briefly in the hallway, watching them before disappearing into his room. By 9, both children were asleep. Maggie returned to the kitchen and found the paper Rachel had given her lying beneath her purse. She unfolded it, expecting school information. Instead, she saw Ethan's and Lucy's full names, insurance details, and Rachel's signature. Maggie read the first paragraph, then the second. Her stomach dropped. The document authorized Margaret Hale to make educational decisions for both children. Beneath that was permission for medical treatment and emergency care. It was not paperwork someone prepared for a weekend visit. Maggie checked the date beside Rachel's signature. Rachel had completed it before driving to the farm. A sound came from the hallway. Maggie looked up. Ethan stood barefoot in the doorway. His eyes went immediately to the paper in her hands. He did not look surprised. She gave you that? He asked. Maggie slowly lowered it. You knew about this? Ethan swallowed. I saw her sign it yesterday, outside. The wind moved through the empty fields. Maggie looked again at Rachel's carefully prepared authorization and finally understood what Ethan had known from the moment the car arrived. Her daughter had never planned to leave those children for only a few days. By the following Monday, Rachel still had not returned. Maggie called 3 times before breakfast, twice after taking the children to school, and once from the tractor shed while checking the hydraulic leak. Every call went directly to voicemail. Rachel? It's Mom. Call me. We need to know what's happening. She hated the word we. It made the situation sound permanent. At the elementary school, the authorization Rachel had signed was enough for Maggie to complete the immediate paperwork. Lucy stayed close to her, nervous but excited about seeing a new classroom. Ethan barely spoke. "I can pick you both up at 3:15. Maggie told them, "I know." Ethan said, "Right here?" Lucy asked. "Right here?" "Promise?" Maggie crouched and zipped Lucy's coat. "Promise?" Ed and Ethan watched her carefully, as though promises were things that required evidence. The days settled into a routine Maggie had never agreed to but could not ignore. She rose before 5 to feed the chickens and check the cattle, came inside to make breakfast, packed 2 lunches, drove the children to school, hurried back for farm work, then stopped again before 3 to collect them. The tractor leak worsened. Feed prices had risen again. At night, after homework and dishes, Maggie studied bills at the kitchen table until the numbers blurred. On Thursday, Daniel came by to look at the tractor. Samuel's younger brother wiped hydraulic fluid from his fingers and shook his head. "This isn't going to be cheap." "Nothing is." "Any word from Rachel?" Maggie's silence answered him. Daniel leaned against the workbench. "You need to call somebody." "I have called her. The authorities. Find out what your legal responsibilities are before this turns into something you can't undo." Maggie stiffened. "They're my grandchildren." "I know who they are. Then don't talk about them like they're a problem to transfer somewhere." Daniel sighed. "I'm talking about you trying to run this farm alone while raising 2 kids at 58. I raised a child before, when Samuel was alive." The mention of her husband silenced them both. Daniel softened. "Maggie, an emergency is one thing. Permanent is another." "Nobody said permanent." Neither of them believed it. That afternoon, Maggie found Ethan in the chicken shed gathering eggs. "You don't have to do that. They needed collecting. You have homework." "Finished it." He carefully placed another egg in the basket. "Grandpa used to let me help." Maggie remembered Samuel showing a much younger Ethan how to hold an egg without squeezing it. "He did?" Ethan carried the basket inside without another word. Lucy handled things differently. Every evening she set 4 places at the kitchen table. "Honey," Maggie said on Friday, "we only need 3 tonight. Mommy might come." Maggie could not make herself remove the extra plate. A week became 2. Rachel finally sent a text. "I'm okay. Sorry. Need more time. Kiss the kids." Maggie called immediately. No answer. Ethan read her expression before she said anything. "She's not coming, is she?" "She says she needs more time." Same thing. That night Maggie went through her bank account, looking for anywhere she could move money from to cover the tractor repair. She found a withdrawal she did not recognize at first. Then she saw the date. 2 weeks before Rachel arrived. The amount matched almost exactly the emergency money Maggie had given Rachel access to months earlier after she claimed she might lose her apartment. Nearly all of it was gone. Maggie stared at the screen. Rachel had taken the money, prepared authorization papers, packed her children, and brought them to Iowa? This had not been a sudden crisis. Across the kitchen, Lucy entered carrying plates. She placed one in front of Maggie, one at Ethan's chair, and one at her own. Then she returned the 4th plate to the cupboard. Maggie watched without speaking. Lucy climbed into her chair. 3 is enough, she said quietly. Ethan looked down at the table. Maggie turned toward the dark window before either child could see her face. Rachel might return tomorrow, next month, or not at all. But for the first time, even 6-year-old Lucy had stopped setting a place for her. Winter settled over the farm before Rachel called again. By then, Maggie had stopped describing the arrangement as temporary. Ethan and Lucy had drawers for their clothes, school papers attached to the refrigerator, and boots lined beside Maggie's at the back door. Maggie built their days around routine because routine was something she could actually promise. Breakfast at 6:30, school at 8, homework before supper, farm chores afterward if the weather allowed. Ethan learned quickly. At first, Maggie gave him only simple jobs, collecting eggs, carrying feed, checking that the water troughs had not frozen. Soon he was doing them without being asked. Lucy preferred the calves. She named every one despite Maggie repeatedly explaining that naming livestock complicated things. That one's Daisy. That one is number 14. Daisy, 14, Maggie surrendered. One January evening, the phone rang during supper. Maggie recognized Rachel's number and answered immediately. Rachel. Hey, Mom, Maggie pushed back from the table. Ethan stopped eating. Where are you? I'm okay. I just wanted to hear the kids. Maggie wanted to demand explanations, but she handed the phone to Lucy first. Lucy's entire face brightened. Mommy! She talked quickly about school, calves, snow, and a spelling test. Then Rachel asked for Ethan. He stared at the phone. You don't have to, Maggie said quietly. Ethan took it anyway. Hi. Maggie could hear only pieces of Rachel's voice. Miss you. Getting things together. Soon. Ethan's jaw tightened. When Rachel answered, What day? Another answer. Ethan looked toward Maggie. You promise? He listened, then handed the phone back. Rachel told Maggie she would come the following Saturday. Be here. Maggie said, I will. After the call, Ethan carried his plate to the sink without finishing supper. The back door slammed moments later. Maggie found him beside the livestock gate, kicking frozen dirt. Ethan, she's lying. We don't know that. Yes, we do. He grabbed the wooden latch and yanked it so hard the weathered piece cracked. Ethan froze. His anger vanished instantly. I'm sorry. Maggie looked at the broken latch. Get the toolbox. He blinked. You're not mad I didn't say that. Get the toolbox. They worked under the barn light, their breath visible in the cold. Maggie showed him how to remove the broken piece and measure replacement wood. Ethan held the flashlight while she drilled new holes. Grandpa would have made this faster, he said. Your grandpa had 40 years of practice. Are you going to make me pay for it? You're helping repair it. That's a start. Ethan was quiet for a while. Then he asked, What if she never comes back? Maggie stopped tightening the bolt. She could have offered comfort. She could have repeated Rachel's promise. Instead, she looked at her grandson. Then we'll still get up tomorrow. And do what? Breakfast, school, feed animals, fix whatever breaks. That's it. Most of life is getting up and doing what needs doing. Ethan considered this, then tested the repaired latch. It works. Usually helps when you don't try to tear it off. He almost smiled. The next week brought another problem. The tractor's hydraulic system finally failed completely, and the heating bill arrived 2 days later. Maggie sat at the kitchen table calculating what could wait. Not heat, not feed, not groceries. Daniel came over after she called about the tractor. Sell the south parcel, he said. You don't need all that acreage. Samuel and I promised we'd keep the land together. Samuel isn't here to pay repair bills. Maggie looked toward the old barn. No. Daniel softened. You can't preserve everything. Maggie knew he was right about that. Just not about which thing should go. 2 days later, she sold Samuel's old fishing boat and several tools she had kept because she could still picture his hands using them. The money covered the heating bill and most of the tractor repair. Ethan noticed the empty space in the equipment shed. Where's Grandpa's boat? Sold it. Why we needed other things more. Ethan looked toward the house, where Lucy's bedroom light glowed through the winter darkness. He understood enough not to ask which things. Saturday arrived clear and bitterly cold. Ethan was dressed before breakfast. By noon, he had checked the driveway 4 times. At 3, he carried a chair near the front window. At 5, Maggie called Rachel. Voicemail. At 6. Lucy asked whether they should eat. Yes, Maggie said. Ethan remained outside at the end of the driveway. Maggie brought him his coat, though he was already wearing one. "Come inside," she said. "Saturday." "I know. It's still Saturday." Maggie stood beside him as darkness swallowed the road. No headlights appeared. Finally, Ethan turned toward the farmhouse without saying anything. Behind them, the empty road disappeared into the winter night. Rachel had promised to come back, and once again she hadn't. 5 years passed in seasons instead of announcements. Maggie measured time by planting, harvest, school pictures, frozen pipes, and the birthdays that seemed to arrive faster every year. Ethan grew from a thin 10-year-old who watched the driveway whenever a car slowed near the farm into a 15-year-old who could lift feed bags without asking for help. Lucy, now 12, still named calves, though she had finally accepted that some of them would not stay forever. Rachel remained unpredictable. Sometimes months passed without a word. Then a birthday card would arrive late, or a call would come in the middle of supper. Once, she appeared without warning and stayed for 3 hours. Lucy followed her from room to room, eager to show her schoolwork and a ribbon from the county fair. Ethan stayed in the barn until Rachel left. Maggie never forced him inside. Each visit seemed to reopen something the children had nearly learned to live around. The farm changed, too. One spring storm peeled metal from the old barn roof, and Maggie spent 2 weeks patching it with Daniel's help. Another year. A calf was born during a freezing March night. Lucy held towels while Maggie worked, terrified and fascinated. When the calf finally breathed, Lucy started crying. "Is it okay? It's loud." Maggie said, "That's usually a good sign." Ethan stood in the doorway pretending not to be worried. He had become useful in ways Maggie had not expected. Machines made sense to him. At 13, he rebuilt a broken mower belt assembly from old parts. At 14, he diagnosed a fuel problem on the utility tractor before Maggie found the manual. By 15, he spent evenings in the equipment shed, with Samuel's remaining tools arranged carefully across the bench. One afternoon, Maggie found him crouched beside the feed auger with grease on his cheek. "What did you break?" she asked. "Nothing." "Then what are you fixing?" The bearing was going. Maggie listened as he explained the vibration he had noticed and the temporary solution he had made from spare parts. His hands moved confidently as he talked. For a moment, Maggie saw Samuel at the same age in photographs she kept upstairs. "Your grandpa would have liked this," she said. Ethan shrugged, but his face changed. "You think he loved anyone who noticed a problem before it became expensive?" "So basically nobody in this family," Maggie laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised them both. Money remained tight. Feed costs rose. A property tax increase forced Maggie to postpone repairs on the farmhouse porch. Daniel kept suggesting practical compromises. Lease out more acreage, sell the north field. "You don't need to prove anything." "I'm not proving anything. You've been saying that for years." He was not entirely wrong. Maggie still woke some mornings feeling as though the farm, the children, and every unpaid bill were a test she had to pass alone. She rarely admitted how tired she was. Ethan noticed anyway. He began checking the cattle before school on mornings when Maggie moved slowly. Lucy learned to start breakfast when Maggie was outside longer than expected. They were not guests anymore. They were part of the machinery of the household, each person knowing what needed doing. One evening, after a long harvest day, Maggie came into the kitchen to find Ethan repairing the loose handle on a drawer. Lucy was doing homework at the table. "Mom, where's the small screwdriver?" Ethan asked without looking up. The room went still. Ethan froze with the drawer handle in his hand. Lucy looked at him. Maggie felt the word land somewhere deep and tender. Ethan's face reddened. "Grandma. I meant Grandma." Maggie reached into the junk drawer and handed him the screwdriver. "Here." She did not smile. She did not make him explain. Ethan took it and returned to the repair. Later, alone in her bedroom, Maggie sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry for less than a minute. Not because she wanted to replace Rachel, she didn't. But for one careless second, Ethan's mouth had named what their lives had already become. The following spring, a large envelope arrived from an agricultural training school in another state. Maggie saw Ethan's name on it and left it unopened on the kitchen counter. By evening, it was gone. A week later, while putting folded laundry on his bed, Maggie noticed a brochure partly hidden beneath a notebook. Agricultural Mechanics and Equipment Systems. She did not pick it up. Through the window, Ethan was outside repairing a cultivator linkage with the same concentration Samuel once brought to every broken machine. Maggie quietly left the room downstairs. She heard Ethan come in later and tuck something deeper into his backpack. He had not told her about the program, and for the first time, Maggie wondered whether the farm that had given him stability might soon become the very place he was afraid would ask him to stay. By Ethan's senior year, the brochure was no longer hidden beneath a notebook. It sat beside his school papers on the kitchen table, its cover showing a student working beneath the raised hood of a tractor. Maggie noticed it every morning and waited for Ethan to bring it up. Finally, one November evening, he did. "I'm applying." Maggie looked up from the farm accounts. To the agricultural mechanics program, Ethan's expression changed. "You knew?" "I've known for a while." "And you didn't say anything? It was yours to tell." He pulled out a chair. "It's out of state." "I can read a brochure." "Ethan, it costs money." That was the part Maggie had been avoiding. Tuition, housing, travel, even with financial aid, the numbers frightened her. "We'll figure out what's possible." Ethan heard something else. "You don't have to pretend you want me to go." "I'm not pretending." "Who handles everything here if I leave?" "I handled it before you were old enough to help." "Barely." The word stung because it was true. Maggie closed the account book. "Your future is not farm labor." "I forgot to hire." Ethan pushed back from the table. "That's not what I said." "Then stop deciding what I mean before I say it." Lucy, now 14, looked between them from the doorway. "You two know you're having different arguments, right?" Neither answered. Weeks later, Rachel called Ethan directly. Maggie learned about it when she found him sitting on the back steps after dark. "Your mother?" she asked. "Yeah." Maggie waited. Ethan rubbed his hands together against the cold. "She heard about the program." "From who? Does it matter? Probably not." He stared toward the barn. "She said I should go. Said I don't owe this farm my whole life." Maggie felt anger rise. Not because Rachel wanted him to leave, but because she had reduced years of responsibility to a debt. "Do you think you owe me?" Ethan stood. "I don't know what I'm supposed to think." "Then figure out what you want before you decide what everybody else expects." The answer satisfied neither of them. By spring, Ethan had been accepted. A work-study position would cover part of his expenses, but he still had decisions to make. Maggie began putting aside what little money she could. She never told him. Then, 2 weeks before an important school event Ethan had been planning to attend with friends, the feed auger failed. Maggie tried to repair it herself before admitting she needed help. Ethan found her in the equipment shed, with parts spread across the floor. "How long has this been down?" "Since this morning." He checked the assembly. The shaft bearing's shot. I can call Daniel. Etten looked at the time. He won't get here before dark. Go to your school thing and leave you doing this alone? Yes. You can't lift that assembly alone, Ethan. Forget it. He changed clothes and spent the next 3 hours repairing the auger. By the time it ran again, his friends had already left. Maggie brought him a sandwich. He did not take it. You should have gone. And you should have told me sooner. I told you to go. That doesn't change what happens if I do, Maggie frowned. What does that mean? Ethan wiped grease from his hands. Every time I try to do something away from here, something breaks. A fence, a tractor, the auger. There's always something. That's farming. Exactly. And none of it is your responsibility. He laughed bitterly. You really believe that, yes? Then why am I always the one fixing it? Maggie's voice hardened. Because you choose to help. Because if I don't, you'll do it alone until you hurt yourself. That still doesn't mean you belong here forever. Maybe I don't want to belong here at all. Silence filled the shed. Lucy had appeared near the doorway, but stayed back. Maggie set the sandwich down. Then go to school. Build your own life. I have never told you otherwise. You don't have to tell me. Ethan gestured toward the machinery, the barn, the fields beyond it. This place tells me every day. This place gave you a home. Maggie regretted the sentence as soon as she heard it. Ethan's face closed. I know. And I'm supposed to spend the rest of my life being grateful for it? That is not what I meant. Mom left because she couldn't stand being trapped here either. Your mother left 2 children behind. Don't confuse that with wanting a different life. Ethan turned away. Maybe this place takes everything from everyone. Maggie stared at him. What Grandpa gave his whole life to it. You're doing the same thing. Mom ran from it. And now every time I talk about leaving, everybody acts like the farm is part of me. I have never asked you to stay. You don't have to. Maggie's hurt became anger. Then what exactly do you want from me? Ethan looked toward the fields, darkening beyond the shed. I want to know what my life looks like when I'm not responsible for keeping yours together. Lucy whispered his name. But Ethan was already walking away. At the doorway, he stopped. After graduation, I'm leaving Iowa. Maggie swallowed. If that's what you want. Ethan looked back at the farm where Maggie had raised him since he was 9. It is. Then he said the part that hurt most. And once I leave, I'm not coming back. Graduation came on a hot evening in late May. Maggie sat beside Lucy on metal bleachers and watched Ethan cross the stage in a blue gown, shake the principal's hand, and accept his diploma. When he looked toward the crowd, Maggie raised one hand. Ethan saw her for a second. The guarded expression he had worn since their argument disappeared. He smiled. Afterward, Lucy hugged him hard enough to wrinkle his gown. Maggie waited until she let go. Congratulations, she said. Thanks. There were 100 other things Maggie wanted to say, but neither of them seemed able to find the first one. The agricultural mechanics program began in August. Ethan had secured work-study assistance and enough financial aid to make leaving possible. Through June and July, he worked extra hours at the farm and a repair shop in town, saving what he could. Maggie quietly collected household things he might need: towels, sheets, an old skillet, laundry detergent. Their conversations became practical. Did you send the housing form? Yes. Change the oil before you drive? I know. Take a winter coat. Grandma, it's August. Winter has been known to follow August. Lucy rolled her eyes whenever they spoke like this. You could both just say you're going to miss each other. Neither did. 3 days before Ethan was scheduled to leave, Maggie went into the equipment shed and opened the cabinet Samuel had built above his workbench. Most of his tools were gone, sold years earlier when Maggie needed money for the tractor and heating bill. but she had kept one compact metal toolbox containing the pieces Samuel used most: combination wrenches, sockets, pliers, screwdrivers, a worn measuring tape, and the ratchet he had refused to replace despite its scratched handle. She carried it into the kitchen. Ethan was packing books into a cardboard box. "This is for you." He looked at the toolbox and immediately recognized it. "Grandpa's." "What's left of them? I thought you wanted to keep these. Tools should be used." Ethan ran his thumb across the scratched ratchet handle. "So that's it?" Maggie frowned. "What do you mean? You're giving me Grandpa's tools? Packing my kitchen stuff, making sure the truck runs? You really are ready for me to go." Maggie heard accusation where she had intended permission. "I thought that was what you wanted." "It is. Then why are you angry?" Ethan closed the toolbox. "I'm not." But he carried it upstairs before she could answer. His last morning arrived under a pale sky. Maggie woke before her alarm and made eggs, bacon, and toast. Ethan came downstairs carrying his final duffel. Lucy followed, red-eyed and silent. They ate badly at 7. Ethan loaded the last box into his truck. Maggie checked the straps holding his belongings in the bed. "They're tight," he said. "I'm checking. You've checked 3 times, then they're definitely tight." Lucy hugged him beside the truck. "You better call me." "I will." "Not Grandma. Me. Both of you. Promise?" Ethan hesitated only a fraction of a second. "Promise." Maggie noticed. Promises had never been simple in this family. Lucy went inside before she cried again. Ethan opened the driver's door, then looked at Maggie. Well, Maggie reached for him, uncertain whether he wanted a hug. Ethan allowed it, but his body stayed stiff. She released him quickly. "Drive carefully." "I know. And if the program isn't what you expected, that doesn't mean you failed." Ethan's expression tightened. "I'm not coming back because it gets hard." "I didn't say you should." "You always do that." "Do what?" "Talk like you're giving me permission to leave while reminding me there's a place waiting for me." Maggie stared at him. "There is a place waiting for you. That isn't a trap. It feels like one sometimes." "Then I don't know what you want me to say." "Maybe nothing." The old argument had returned before either recognized it. Maggie folded her arms. "I have spent years trying not to make you responsible for this farm, and I've spent years watching you make yourself responsible for everything. That was my choice." "Was it? Grandpa stayed until it wore him down. You stayed. Everybody acts like staying makes you good." "No one said that." Ethan looked toward the fields. Maybe Mom was the only one smart enough to leave. Maggie went completely still. Ethan's anger vanished almost as soon as the words were spoken. "Grandma, you should get on the road." "I didn't mean it like that." "You said it." "I was mad. And now you're leaving, so leave." Ethan stared at her, hurt replacing regret. Maggie wanted to take the sentence back, but pride held her silent. He climbed into the truck. Samuel's toolbox rested behind the passenger seat. The engine started. Maggie stood beside the driveway as Ethan drove away without looking back. The next morning, she made breakfast by habit. Eggs for herself, toast for Lucy. Then she reached for a third plate. Her hand stopped. Maggie stared at it before quietly returning it to the cupboard. Weeks passed. Ethan sent Lucy messages. Maggie received none. Then, one evening, while she was outside checking a fence, her phone rang inside the farmhouse. By the time she heard it and hurried into the kitchen, the call had ended. Ethan appeared on the screen. Maggie called back immediately. It rang until voicemail answered. "Ethan, it's Grandma. I missed your call. Call me when you can." She kept the phone beside her through supper. She carried it upstairs that night. Ethan did not call again. 7 years passed without a clean break or a true reconciliation. Ethan never disappeared completely. That almost made the distance harder to understand. A Christmas card arrived the first winter with 3 hurried lines and no photograph. The next year, he texted Maggie on her birthday. "Hope you're doing okay." She replied, "You too, be safe." Neither mentioned the missed phone call or the words spoken beside his truck. Lucy refused to accept their silence as normal. She finished high school, attended college in Iowa, and eventually found work in a town close enough to visit without turning every trip home into an expedition. She called Maggie several times a week. "Ethan's working on farm equipment now," Lucy reported one Sunday while helping stack firewood. "Where? Different places. He moves around some." Maggie placed another log on the pile. "Sounds like he's busy." Lucy stared at her. "You could ask him yourself. If he wants me to know, he'll tell me." That is the most Hale family answer imaginable, Maggie almost smiled. She did ask questions when Lucy volunteered information. She learned Ethan had completed his agricultural mechanics training and found steady work. He repaired machinery, helped with farm operations, and apparently had become the person people called when expensive equipment stopped working at the worst possible time. Maggie was proud of him privately. Pride, unfortunately, did not know how to cross 7 years of awkward silence. The farm aged with her, at 65. Maggie could still handle most mornings, but tasks that once took an hour now took 2. Arthritis settled into her fingers and knees. In winter, opening frozen gates became painful. Climbing onto machinery required more caution. One afternoon, she slipped, stepping down from the tractor, and landed hard enough to frighten herself. She lay in the dirt for several seconds, staring at the sky. Nothing was broken. That did not make getting up easy. Daniel arrived later to repair a fence and noticed her limp. "How long are you planning to do this?" "Until the fence fixes itself? I mean the farm?" Maggie said nothing. Daniel was older too. His hair had gone mostly gray, and even he no longer pretended he could appear every time she needed another pair of hands. "Sell while you still get to choose," he said. "Don't wait until an injury chooses for you." I've heard this speech for about 15 years. You should improve it. You should listen to it. The numbers supported him. Property taxes had risen again. The barn roof needed another repair. The tractor Ethan once helped maintain was becoming unreliable, and replacing it was impossible. Leasing some acreage helped, but not enough to remove the pressure. Maggie began postponing repairs that Samuel would never have ignored. One evening, while checking a loose board in the barn, she noticed pencil marks on a support post. Ethan 10, Ethan 12, Lucy 9, Lucy 11. Maggie touched the highest mark. She remembered children arguing over who had grown faster. Samuel's old measuring tape, muddy boots, school lunches, and a boy who once asked what they would do if his mother never returned. Maggie had answered because she needed to sound certain, "We'll still get up tomorrow." She had done exactly that for years. Suddenly she wondered whether she had mistaken endurance for a permanent plan. At Christmas, Lucy brought a box containing old cards Maggie had stored in a drawer. "You keep everything," Lucy said. "Not everything." Maggie found one postcard from Ethan, sent several years earlier. On the back, beneath a brief holiday greeting, he had written, "Still using Grandpa's tools." Maggie read the sentence twice. She pictured Samuel's scratched ratchet inside Ethan's truck and wondered how many machines those tools had repaired since leaving Iowa. "He kept them," she said. Lucy sat beside her. "Of course he did. I thought maybe he'd replace them, Grandma. Leaving here didn't mean he hated everything about here." Maggie looked at her. "He said he wasn't coming back." "He was 18. 18-year-olds can mean things. They can also be wrong. Maggie put the card back carefully. That winter was harder than the last. A repair bill consumed most of her remaining farm reserve. Her knee worsened. One icy morning, she needed 20 minutes to finish a chore Samuel once completed before coffee. For the first time, the farm did not feel like something she was preserving. It felt like something she might damage by refusing to admit she could no longer carry it alone. In early March, Maggie sat at the kitchen table with the farm accounts spread before her. She called Daniel first. "You're going to say I told you so." "Probably. Try not to enjoy it. No promises." After hanging up, she found the number of a local real estate agent who handled agricultural property. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She looked through the window at the barn, the fields, and the driveway where children had once waited for someone who never came. Then Maggie made the call. "My name is Margaret Hale," she said when the realtor answered. "I need to know what my farm is worth." The realtor arrived on a windy March morning, carrying a clipboard and wearing boots too clean for the yard. Maggie noticed that before she noticed anything else. He walked the property with her, asked about acreage, drainage, outbuildings, soil history, equipment, leases, and road access. Then spent nearly an hour taking notes inside the farmhouse. By the time he closed the folder, Maggie felt as if he had reduced 40 years of life to columns. "You've got interest potential," he said, "especially if a larger operation wants to absorb the acreage." Maggie looked through the kitchen window toward the barn. "That's probably what would happen." "Most likely. Depends on the buyer." 2 days later, he returned with preliminary numbers and a listing agreement. Maggie read every page. She had not signed the final sale paperwork because there was no buyer yet, but she agreed to list the farm. Lucy found out that evening. "You actually did it?" she asked over the phone. "I listed it." "Grandma, don't start. I'm not starting. I'm asking why you didn't tell me first, because you would have tried to talk me out of it. Maybe because you don't really want to sell." Maggie looked at the stack of unpaid repair estimates beside her. Want doesn't fix machinery. Lucy was quiet. "I could help more. You already help. I could come back more often." "No." Maggie's answer came quickly enough to surprise them both. "You have your job, your life. I am not having you rearrange everything because I refuse to make a decision." "But this is our farm." "It was your home. That doesn't make it your obligation." Maggie heard the difference as she said it. Years earlier, she might have accepted Lucy's offer simply because family was supposed to stay. Now the idea made her uncomfortable. She had spent too long confusing sacrifice with love. The first serious buyer toured the farm the following week. He represented a larger operation several counties away and asked practical questions about combining fields, removing interior fencing, and expanding equipment access. Nothing he said was unreasonable. That made it worse. Maggie stood beside the chicken shed afterward and tried to picture the place without the narrow pasture fence Samuel had built, without the old barn, without the smaller fields divided the way they had always been. Financially, the offer would probably make sense. Emotionally, she could not decide whether that mattered anymore. Daniel stopped by after hearing about the showing. "Good offer, potentially. Then take it if it works." Maggie gave him a sideways look. "You waited 15 years for this moment? And now that it's here..." "I'm smart enough not to celebrate." They walked toward the barn. "You okay?" he asked. "Ask me after I sign something." "That bad? That uncertain?" Daniel nodded. "Uncertainty doesn't mean wrong." Maggie spent the next afternoon walking the farm alone. She started at the chicken shed where Ethan had once collected eggs without being asked. Then the barn where Lucy had cried over a newborn calf. She touched the post with their height marks and continued toward the equipment shed. Samuel's workbench was still there, but the hooks above it were mostly empty. Ethan had taken the most important tools years ago. Maggie smiled faintly at the thought. Still using Grandpa's tools. She crossed the yard to the farmhouse and stood in the kitchen doorway. The table had held bills, homework, arguments, birthday cakes, Rachel's unanswered calls, and more breakfasts than Maggie could count. For years, she had believed saving the farm meant protecting all of those memories. Maybe memories did not need acreage to survive. Near sunset, the realtor returned with a for sale sign. Maggie watched him hammer it into the ground near the road. The whiteboard looked wrong against the brown fields. "You can still change your mind before accepting an offer," he reminded her. "I know." That night Maggie slept badly. Wind rattled a loose gutter. Her knee ached. Around 4:30 she finally gave up and went downstairs. She made coffee, but did not turn on the kitchen lights. Through the window she could just make out the for sale sign near the road. She wondered how many mornings she had stood in this room waiting for daylight. Too many to count. The farm had survived Samuel's death, Rachel's disappearance, 2 frightened children, drought, repairs, debt, winters, and arguments. It had been where people left and where Maggie kept getting up anyway. Maybe selling it did not erase that. She carried her coffee toward the back door. Then she heard an engine. At first, Maggie assumed someone was passing on the road. The sound grew louder. Headlights turned between the fence posts. A pickup rolled slowly up the driveway before dawn. Maggie stood completely still. No one visited at that hour unless something was wrong. The truck stopped near the farmhouse. Its engine went quiet. Maggie set down her coffee and opened the door. The man who stepped out of the pickup was broader than the 18-year-old Maggie remembered, with work-worn shoulders, a short beard, and grease darkening the cuff of his jacket. For one suspended second, she saw both versions of him at once, the boy who had stood at the end of the driveway waiting for Rachel, and the young man who had driven away carrying Samuel's toolbox. Ethan. He closed the truck door. "Hi, Grandma." Maggie gripped the porch railing. She had imagined this moment enough times to know imagination was useless. There was no sudden embrace, no perfect sentence, only cold air between them, and 7 years neither knew how to cross. Ethan glanced toward the road. "I saw the sign, apparently, Lucy told me." Maggie nodded. "She shouldn't have." "I'm glad she did." Ethan walked closer but stopped at the bottom step. "Are you selling? I listed it. Have you signed anything? Not a sale contract." His shoulders loosened slightly. Maggie noticed and immediately stiffened. "If you came here because you think I need rescuing, turn around." Ethan almost smiled. "You still start arguments before breakfast. Only when people arrive uninvited before sunrise." "Fair." He looked toward the fields. "I didn't come to rescue you." "Then why are you here?" Ethan shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. "Because I should have been here a long time ago." The words landed harder than Maggie expected. She opened the door. "Coffee, please?" Inside, Ethan looked around the kitchen as if checking whether time had moved anything important. His eyes paused on the table, the old cabinets, then the doorway where Lucy used to leave her school bag. Maggie poured coffee. "How long are you staying?" "I don't know yet." "That sounds familiar." Ethan lowered his cup. "I deserved that." Maggie immediately wished she had not said it. He looked older when he was quiet. Not old, exactly. Settled. "Lucy says you finished the mechanics program?" "Yeah. Agricultural mechanics and equipment systems. And now, started doing repair work. Then equipment maintenance for a couple larger farms. Last few years I've been handling more operations too, planting schedules, machinery, crews, maintenance planning." Maggie studied him. "You like it?" "Most days." Good. Another silence. Ethan looked toward the mudroom. Grandpa's toolbox is still in my truck. Maggie's throat tightened. Still using it. Every week. She remembered the old postcard. I kept the card. Ethan looked surprised. The one about the tools? You didn't send many. He rubbed a thumb along the coffee cup. I wasn't very good at knowing what to say. Runs in the family. This time both of them smiled. Briefly, the smile faded when Ethan looked toward the driveway. I'm sorry about what I said the morning I left. Maggie knew exactly which words he meant. Maybe Mom was the only one smart enough to leave. You were 18. That doesn't make it okay. No, he nodded, accepting that. I spent a long time feeling ashamed of it. Then the longer I waited, the harder calling got. You did call once. Ethan looked up. You remember I missed it. I thought maybe you didn't want to answer. Maggie stared at him. I called you back. I know. Later I saw the voicemail. And you still didn't call? I was stupid. You were stubborn. Also true. Maggie sat across from him. I thought giving you space was what you wanted. Ethan leaned back. I thought your silence meant you were done with me. They both looked away. The absurdity too painful to laugh at. 7 years built from two people trying not to impose on the other? Ethan finally said. The farm didn't trap me. Maggie waited. For a long time I thought it did. Every broken machine, every chore, every time you needed help, it felt like proof that if I stayed, I'd never have my own life. He looked toward the barn through the window. Then I left and figured out something embarrassing. What? Everything I was good at came from here. Maggie said nothing. Not just fixing machines, showing up early, staying when a job went bad, not walking away because something was harder than expected. He gave a quiet laugh. You taught me how to stay with a problem until it could be fixed. Maggie looked down at her hands, the knuckles swollen with age. I also taught you how to argue, professionally. She smiled, despite herself. Ethan's expression turned serious again. I'm not here because I failed somewhere else. I have work. I have a life. I came because I finally understand that leaving and abandoning somebody aren't the same thing. Maggie felt the sentence settle between them. Ethan looked toward the for sale sign. You gave me somewhere stable enough to leave from. I should have understood that sooner. Maggie swallowed. And what do you expect me to do with that? Nothing yet. He stood and walked to the window. I just need to know one thing. Maggie followed his gaze toward the fields Samuel had worked, the barn Ethan had repaired as a boy, and the road Rachel had disappeared down years ago. Ethan turned back to her. You haven't signed the sale contract. Right? No, Maggie said. I haven't signed a sale contract. Ethan nodded once, but Maggie raised a hand before relief could settle across his face. That does not mean you're moving back here because you feel guilty. Grandma, I mean it. I raised you so you could have a life. I'm not going to become the reason you give it up. Ethan pulled out the chair again. What if I'm not giving anything up? Maggie frowned. I've been thinking about working independently for over a year, he said. Equipment repair, maintenance planning, farm operations. Most of what I do now can be done without staying tied to one employer. And you conveniently decided that before Lucy called. Yes. He reached into his jacket and placed several folded pages on the table. I didn't drive all night with a sentimental speech and no plan. Maggie looked over the numbers. Ethan had estimated repair costs, acreage income, machinery priorities, and what could be leased to neighboring operations. Nothing on the pages promised miracles. The oldest tractor still needed work. The barn roof could wait. Some acreage could remain leased, reducing Maggie's workload while providing steady income. You made all this before coming? Most of it. Lucy gave me the numbers she knew. Maggie shook her head. That girl. She's terrifying when organized. By afternoon, Lucy herself arrived. She hugged Ethan first, then hit his shoulder. 7 years, idiot. Good to see you too. They sat around the same kitchen table where they had once done homework while Maggie laid down one condition. Nobody stays here because they owe me. Lucy nodded immediately. Ethan did not. I do owe you. No, you raised us. That was my choice. Maggie leaned toward him. And this has to be yours? Ethan looked at the fields through the window. It is. They spent the next several weeks testing the plan rather than pretending one conversation could settle everything. Ethan repaired the tractor instead of replacing it. He found work with nearby farms while taking over the jobs Maggie could no longer safely manage. More acreage was leased. Maggie kept ownership of the farm but stopped treating every chore as proof she could still do it. Daniel studied Ethan's numbers one afternoon and grunted, Annoyingly sensible. That's high praise from you, Maggie said. Daniel looked at her. You know, maybe you were right not to sell all those years ago. Maggie shook her hand. And maybe you were right that I couldn't carry it alone forever. We're getting disturbingly mature. Don't get used to it. Rachel remained outside the center of their new life. Ethan told Maggie he had spoken with her occasionally over the years. Rachel was alive, moving from place to place, less often now. But she had never become the mother he once waited for. Are you angry with her? Maggie asked. Ethan considered it. Sometimes. But I stopped waiting for her to become someone different. He looked toward the driveway. I spent years thinking leaving and abandoning were the same thing. They aren't. Maggie understood. Ethan had left to grow. Rachel had left responsibility behind. The difference had taken both of them years to name. The realtor removed the for sale sign in April. Maggie watched from the porch as it disappeared into his truck. She expected triumph. Instead, she felt something quieter. Relief, without desperation. The farm was staying, but not because she had chained anyone to it. By harvest season, mornings had changed. One October day, Maggie woke to the sound of a tractor and panicked. Sunlight was already coming through the curtains. She looked at the clock. 7:15. Oh, Lord. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs before remembering she was no longer responsible for being first outside. Through the kitchen window, Ethan was crossing the field in the repaired tractor. His pickup stood beside the equipment shed. Samuel's old metal toolbox rested open in the bed. Maggie made coffee. A car arrived around 9. Lucy stepped out carrying a toddler who immediately demanded to see the big tractor. Maggie laughed as the child ran across the yard under Lucy's watchful eye. Another generation's footprints crossed the same ground where Ethan and Lucy had once arrived carrying overstuffed bags. At noon, Ethan came inside smelling of dust and diesel. He stopped when he saw eggs, potatoes, biscuits, and 4 plates on the kitchen table. What? You don't have to feed everybody anymore. Maggie looked at the food, then at him. I know. That was the difference. Years ago she had cooked because 2 frightened children depended on her, and because stopping felt too much like failing. Today she had made lunch simply because people she loved were here. Sit down before it gets cold. Ethan obeyed. After eating, he glanced through the window toward the driveway. Do you remember what you told me when I asked what we'd do if Mom never came back? Maggie did. She could still see him at 9 years old beneath the barn light, ashamed of the gate latch he had broken. I told you we'd still get up tomorrow. Ethan nodded. We did. Maggie looked at him for a long moment. She had once believed her legacy would be measured in acres kept together, taxes paid, fences repaired, and buildings preserved. But the farm's real legacy sat across from her. A boy who had been abandoned had grown into a man capable of leaving without abandoning anyone. Maggie had given him somewhere stable enough to leave from. He had returned not because he failed elsewhere, not because she demanded it, and not because guilt had trapped him. He had returned because adulthood had finally allowed him to understand what the farm had given him. Late that afternoon, Maggie found Ethan beside an old livestock gate. The wooden latch had cracked. "Need help?" she asked. Ethan held up a replacement piece. "Think I can manage." Maggie leaned against the fence and watched him measure, drill, and tighten the new hardware. She remembered another winter evening, another broken latch, and a furious 9-year-old asking what happened if his mother never came home. Ethan tested the repair twice. The gate closed cleanly. There. He picked up Samuel's scratched ratchet and started toward the farmhouse. Maggie followed. For most of her life, she had believed somebody always had to stay because everybody else might leave. Now she understood something gentler. Some people left because they were abandoning you. Others left because they were growing. Love could not always stop either one. What love could do was give someone a road worth remembering. Ethan slowed until Maggie caught up beside him. Together they crossed the yard toward the farmhouse. While Lucy's child laughed somewhere near the porch, an evening light stretched across the fields. This time Maggie was not watching the driveway for someone who had promised to return. Neither was Ethan. The waiting was over. They were already home.